She had never rebloomed for me. I can't tell you how many times I almost threw her out of frustration. Hi, welcome to my channel. Today I want to talk about the Phalaenopsis orchid. This is one that I purchased approximately 5 years ago. And I want to talk about what I've learned in the 5 years of growing this orchid and the challenges I've had and how I have overcome the challenges. When I first got this Phalaenopsis, it's a no ID Phalaenopsis. Got it at a discount store in their garden department. And I brought her home. She was in bloom and she was beautiful and gorgeous. Brought her home. I immediately, after her blooms fell off, I repotted her in bark and soil, or the orchid bark, and she just didn't do real well, and she wasn't growing new leaves. She didn't rebloom after about a year or so, and so I started investigating different ways of growing the Phalaenopsis orchids, and all orchids really. And so I ended up pulling her out of her pot and seeing that her roots were really not happy. So one of the things that I discovered was something called semi-water culture. And for me, this has worked out great for all my Phalaenopsis. I put her in a vase and just put some pebbles in the bottom here. I discovered this probably about a year and a half ago and started this orchid in the semi-water culture. She had never rebloomed for me. I can't tell you how many times I almost threw her out of frustration. But then I started doing her in the semi-water culture, and I could see how the roots were doing. See, the roots were regrowing, doing well. She put out new leaves for me, and so she was really making a lot of good progress with this method. But I want to encourage people, there's so many different ways to grow an orchid, not just in the pot with the bark. It really depends on what works best for you and that particular orchid. All orchids are different. I have all of my Phalaenopsis here actually growing in semi-water culture. Exact same way with jars. I have some in old pickle jars. I have some in vases, some in a glass cup. It doesn't have to be glass. I have some growing in old mayonnaise jars I've taken the labels off of. So what I do, and what I would suggest doing, if I had to go back and do everything all over again, I would unpot your orchid right away. I know there are a lot of people that say wait until the blooms fall off, but if it's not a happy, healthy orchid, the blooms are going to fall off and die anyway. Take it out of the pot, put it in your, put your pebbles in the bottom. You can get them at the dollar store. You can find those really inexpensively. And just set them in there. So you don't have to go to huge expenses. You can just get a vase, get some pebbles if you want. This also helps make your vase a little bit more stable. Wash your roots off. Make sure you try to get all of the bark, whatever it was packed in. They also, when they first come, they're usually in a plug, a moss plug or something. You want to try to get all that off. You also want to try to get all the dead roots off. I'll explain that in a later video too. But what I did was put it in a vase. Put some water in, let it soak for a couple hours. You know what? I've even forgotten it was sitting in water and left it for 24 hours. As long as you're not touching the water's not touching the base of your plant, you're going to be fine. But I've left it sometimes 24 hours, poured it off, and just let it dry a couple of days, and they do just fine. I use tap water out of my sink, to water my orchids. And they seem to be doing really, really well. So what I do is I turn on the hot water, let it get as warm as it's going to get, turn on the cold water, and I get it to about room temperature so it doesn't shock the roots or anything. So I had her for 4 years. She didn't bloom. But once I took her out of her pot and put her in the semi-water culture, which means I basically put about, I don't know, an inch or two water just so that the roots are able to soak up water. And I let her sit in that water for approximately 1-2 hours until the roots get nice and green. And then I let her drain and then sit for a couple of days to dry out. So then last fall, I want to say, she started putting out she put out a bloom spike here. Let me turn it around a little bit. Maybe you can see it better. She put out this bloom spike and bloomed for me, and it was gorgeous. It had actually been so long since I had seen her blooms. I actually forgot what color they were and everything. But she put out a bloom spike, had some gorgeous blooms. I think she had about 5 or 6 blooms on there. Then I cut down her bloom spike after the top of it started getting woody. And I clipped it down to the second node from the bottom. And that's what, a lot of people have recommended. So I did that. And then about a month ago, I noticed she started throwing out this secondary bloom spike. And I was so excited because she had just got, done after her first bloom. And now she is putting out this second one. And she will probably be blooming before I get this video up. So I'll show you those blooms as well. So you can really experiment with what works for you, but also it doesn't have to be an expensive thing. I was under a lot of preconceived ideas when I first bought my orchid, that, it might be an expensive hobby. They're very difficult, very finicky. And especially what I found with the Phalaenopsis and is that they're not as difficult as I thought they were. The other reason I wanted to start with the Phalaenopsis is that's because what's most readily available in stores, and you can find them easily. They're fairly inexpensive. One of the mistakes I made with putting this Phalaenopsis in this vase with the narrower neck is it was great for support to begin with, but then when she grew all these massive root system, I cannot get her out. So when I go to put her in a different vase, I'm probably going to have to put a paper bag over the vase and break the vase. So you might want to go with something that's a more open mouth type vase that doesn't she won't get locked into. These on the top, these are called aerial roots, and that is perfectly normal for orchids, especially the Phalaenopsis. They throw out lots of aerial roots. So it kind of freaked me out at first, thinking, oh, how am I going to fit those, back in the dirt or the bark or whatever. And they just let them go. They're doing their thing, absorbing moisture or humidity from the air. And the other thing is all my Phalaenopsis I have in a east-facing window with a really, really inexpensive sheer curtain covering that window. and they do just awesome in that window. They seem to really love it. And your orchids will tell you whether they like something or not. You know, their leaves will turn different colors. If there's too much light, they'll have a little red tinge, except with the exception of the darker flowered orchids or Phalaenopsis, because sometimes the leaves will come out and have a darker color tinge to them. But they can also turn a yellow if they have too much sunlight. And this is just my limited understanding and what I have learned over the 5 years I've been growing. I am nowhere near an expert, but I'm sharing with you my understanding and my experiences, and to really encourage you. It's not as difficult as I was under the understanding that it was. And it's a lot of fun. I get a lot of joy even just seeing the new roots and the root growth and everything, as well as reblooming and the flower spike. New leaves are always very exciting as well. Thank you for watching my channel.